Lead us from untruth to truth, from darkness to light, from death to immortality, to peace, peace, peace.
Hello, viewers. I am Chitra Krishnamurthy, the director of Nrityalaya, School of Indian Classical Odissi Dance in Potomac, Maryland. Welcome to the Nrityalaya webinar series, Pursuing Passions to Heal, Her Story and Our Stories. While COVID-19 has presented many challenges, we have proceeded with choreography and would like to share with you some glimpses of our upcoming show. In the fall, we will be presenting Her Story, a dance portraying a woman's battle to overcome darkness by rekindling her passion for dance. To shed more light on the topic of depression, we are conducting a series of webinars. To moderate today's webinar, I will now call upon one of our associates, a distinguished Toastmaster, Mr. Krish Murthy.
Hello, viewers. I'm Krish Murthy. I have been associated with Nrityalaya since its inception. We now present the second pre-production webinar. We have assembled an esteemed group of panelists. The panelists include speakers who have openly talked about the malady called depression that has challenged them. The panelists also include a therapist, a healthcare professional who will give us further insight into this darkness and the healing and recovery process. We are calling these initial conversations pre-HERstory webinars, as these very same panelists will talk about their different paths to healing in the post-HERstory webinars. We will keep you updated and take this opportunity to invite you to view our presentation of HERstory. We hope you will join us at the online premiere. Now, recovery may not be the right word I'm looking for. I think I mean healing and the healing process. I'm convinced that with the different kinds of help available these days, and with modern technological innovations, we will conquer and move forward. I am positively cheering for hope in the future. Let's start our conversation with the panelists. We will conduct the discussion as a question and answer session. We are honored to have such a diverse panel today. I would like to introduce the speakers and healthcare professional here with us. Our speakers are Ms. Wendy Leggett and Dr. Jibet Lozapone. Ms. Wendy Leggett. Dr. Jibet Lozapone.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Our healthcare professional for today is Dr. Suzanne Nixon. Thank you all for being here with us. I would like to start off this panel discussion with a few questions for our speakers. Ms. Leggett,
Yes.
in the fall, we will be seeing and hearing about HERstory, our dance production. Today, we would like to hear from you about your story. Please share it with our viewers, addressing the following points. What were your experiences with depression? Did any specific event trigger the depression, or was it random? Ms. Leggett, over to you.
Thank you. Well, I'm the third of 6 children. and my mother didn't want any children. So now I understand that she was going through depression, but I didn't understand at the time and just thought that she didn't love me. And she coped with her depression unknowingly by isolating herself, and we were left to raise ourselves. At age 7, I was given the last baby to raise. So that was actually the first time I experienced love. Whenever I tried to ask questions to, clarify the reality of what was happening, I was always told to shut up, stop asking questions. I was crazy. So by the time I was 13, I decided if I really am crazy, I need to see a psychiatrist. So I got the telephone book, this big in those days, and tried to look up psychiatrists, but I didn't know it started with a P. So I was tearing through the phone book. I'm so frustrated. I can't find a psychiatrist. So my mother comes in and says, "What's going on?" And I said, "How do you spell psychiatrist? I know it's in here somewhere." And she said, "What do you want a psychiatrist for?" And I said, "Because I feel crazy. I need help." And she just laughed at me. And then my older brother came in and said, "What's going on in here?" And I said, "Tell me how to spell psychiatrist, or I'm going to run away from home. And if you don't tell me, I'm going to become a tramp on the railroads." And he laughed at me because he knew what tramp meant and I didn't. So I meant a hobo, but he said, "You're crazy." So that was the first time I asked for help and was, again, dismissed as crazy. No one asked what was wrong or why I felt I needed help. So then I jumped to 25 when I was married and was going through postpartum depression with my second baby. And my husband said I better go straighten myself out because I was crazy. So my husband was in the military, and that led to 20 years of male military therapists, mostly that were going through 6 weeks of training. So I've had about 20 therapists. And as men in the military, I was again dismissed as an unhappy wife and crazy. So it wasn't until I was 65. Oh no, I did when my children left me and went to college, like I, raised them to, I really went through a bad empty nest. And I searched again for therapists and found my first female therapist. And she completely acknowledged me and told me that I did have depression and, that my mother did love me. And that was when I found out my mother was depressed. But then my therapist died of breast cancer. So that's when I was 49. So then we go through more years, and I sold my house to downsize, and I instantly regretted my decision and started getting very depressed. Then the political climate started heating up, very disturbing news cycles, which caused flashbacks from my being raped. I started having PTSD symptoms, and I went into a very deep depression. I found a program at the hospital where you could be an outpatient for 4 months, and went through that, and that led me to TMS, which is transcranial magnetic stimulation, the new version of electric shock therapy. And they put that, mapped my head and put this thing on me every day for 9 weeks, which is, I think, what helped me come out of it. And here I am today, still trying to get better.
Thank you, Ms. Leggett. Dr. Lozapone, let me ask you, what is your story? Please share it with our viewers, addressing the following points. What were your experiences with depression? Did any specific event trigger depression, or was it random? Dr. Lozapone, over to you.
Thank you. So I began having experiences with mental health as a young child. And in fact, my mother was carrying me to term while she was grieving the unexpected death of my brother, who had passed away from a swimming pool accident. He had drowned. And there's been a lot of studies about this, about how mothers can pass trauma to their children. And I think that was really my introduction to trauma. As a little girl, I, based on the experience that my mother had had, was definitely raised with a mother who was extremely overprotective. And that generated a lot of fear in me, which led to me experiencing tremendous anxiety. I didn't know it as anxiety then. I've come to understand it as anxiety now. And when I look back, what I realize is that my introduction to anxiety was truly separation anxiety, to the point where I was absolutely inconsolable. Um, from there, I began to have various traumatic experience, sexual abuse, sexual violence, extreme bullying, due to the fact that I was mixed race. My father is American, Black, and Chinese. My mother is white, Venezuelan, Italian, Spanish. And that made it so that I didn't really quite fit in. I wasn't Black enough. I wasn't white enough. I wasn't Hispanic enough. Was also just bullied for my interests, for not fitting into a particular box. So that was incredibly difficult. There was also a lot of rejection from family members, whether it was because of race or because I was also part of a blended family. So there were a lot of tensions there. And also the repercussions of being a teen mom, and the stigmas associated with that. And so, um, in that, there's also the experience of being a person of color, right? I cannot get away from what the experience is of walking through the world as a Black woman and what that means. And what I would say is my experience has really been this culmination of burdens. Um, and coming up through a system where, when my parents began to understand that, okay, well, something's wrong, but not really having the answers or knowing what to do about it, I ended up being handed off to a system that didn't really take good care of me, and a lot of misdiagnoses, a lot of not really hearing me as a child, not being believed. Um, and again, even beyond the healthcare professionals, not really feeling safe in my own home, not feeling like I had the support that I needed, and that I really was a burden to my family. And so, I would say that that has really been my experience. It's going through various traumas, um, and just feeling this sort of culmination of burdens. And it's been a very, very heavy weight. It has impacted every aspect of my life. And I would say, more than anything now, how it presents in my life, more than anything, is severe anxiety.
Thank you, Dr. Lozapone and Ms. Leggett. Your stories are moving and inspiring. I will now turn to our healthcare professional to get her insight on the speaker's experiences. Dr. Nixon, what have your experiences been with depression in the community? Dr. Nixon, over to you.
Chris. I first just want to address with both Wendy and Jabet said, and first say, I'm sorry that you've had such difficult, challenging childhood experiences, and this is all too familiar. I am in private practice and have been for over 25 years, and I often hear the stories that you have just spoken. And as Wendy said, often parents are not present. Parents are not hearing or listening to the depth with their eyes, their ears, or even their felt sense to understand the child's experience. And then the child gets very isolated and feels very alone. And that's one of the first conditions that can then lead into a state of depression. So I want to say to you, Wendy, I understand what you were saying and how you would, as a child, be very confused about what was going on and then be burdened with so many responsibilities. And then often the child does not know what's going on. The child knows that something is kind of wrong, something doesn't feel right, and can't use their skill sets because their cognitive mind is not developed to a point of understanding. So of course you turn to your parents or significant mentors and you're not getting the answers. And that often happens. And then your wild search to find somebody was really the desperate attempt, to try to reach out and get help. And I'm glad that you've been able to get help over the years. And then I also just want to add to that the story, when we look at psychoanalysis, psychology, psychotherapy, it really started with women, looking at what was wrong with women versus what was going on with all people. And regrettably, then women often got the stigma of depression and often weren't heard by male doctors and weren't treated appropriately or effectively by male doctors because they didn't understand the experience and thought it was more gender bias, which we know it's not. Everybody at one stage in their life goes through a period of depression. Why? Because we all suffer as human beings because life is imperfect. And in our suffering, we feel sad. And then the skill is to be aware of what's happening and use coping mechanisms to deal with that sadness and that suffering. And that really is what I do in my private practice of trying to teach people understanding what depression is, the symptoms of depression, and then also coping mechanisms of how to deal it and pathways to healing, as Chris was referring to. And Jabet, I wanted to say one thing about your experience, and I'm sorry that you went through so many turmoils and being a woman of color, all different layers of what was happening in your experience. So you mentioned something about your mother's trauma. And what I want to say is you kind of like picked it up. There's a term for that, and that's called vicarious traumatization. Vicarious traumatization. And that means when somebody in your family system or in a network that you belong to experiences trauma and talks about it, you kind of pick it up, right? It's also when you witness somebody's trauma, you kind of pick it up. So that's often what the experience is. In my community, in addition to being in private practice and servicing women, men, and teens, I am seeing more and more depression, and I think it's been really escalated because of COVID. And what we know is that if you're feeling sadness or suffering and you have some mild or moderate depression, it gets worse or intensifies when we are in isolation and we are alone and we don't have the vehicles to connect. I have been presenting at business organizations, community organizations, Chamber of Commerce to inform people about depression and mental illness and how to break the stigma of mental illness and coping skills to develop resiliency. Thank you.
Thank you for your thoughts on the experiences of the speakers.
Thank
now,
you.
Let me get back to the speakers. Ms. Leggett, did you face any stigma that deterred you from seeking help? If so, how has that affected you? And people say, snap out of it. Can you really snap out of it? How would you perceive this? Ms. Leggett, over to you.
Well, thank you. I had a lot of stigma. People told me I was crazy. I don't even think we used the word depressed. I was just told I was crazy and that crazy couldn't be fixed. And then I would have people tell me to snap out of it as if it was a choice I was making. You don't have to feel this way if you don't want to. You're choosing to feel this way. So it's not something you can just snap out of. Also, I was told by a therapist that if I cried more often in front of my husband, and even though I was ugly when I cried, that my husband wouldn't drink as much. So it was always put back on me. So as I said, it took me, I'm still working on it. I think it's a lifelong thing. I just felt so unheard, and I have felt crazy.
Thank you, Ms. Leggett. Dr. Lozapone, how did the stigma of depression impact you from reaching out to others and seeking help? And how did you overcome the stigma? Dr. Lozapone, over to you.
Thank you. So like I mentioned, I ended up in the system for youth that are suffering and struggling with mental health issues. And so I won't name those services in the area where I grew up, but they are county based and county run. And I became very distrustful of the entire system. The professionals that I was seeing, it became clear that I was not being heard, and that how they were diagnosing me was inaccurate. And so it really just led to me being distrustful and very angry with the system. So I spent a lot of time, most of my high school experience, between inpatient and outpatient, where I would have to take a specific bus to go to a facility, would spend my day in the facility and then come home. And I think, especially when I think about the bullying, what was really traumatizing for me was that I was the one being bullied. I was the one being sent to see professionals. I was the one being medicated. But the individuals that were harming me and had the behavioral issues and were tormenting me got to go to school. And there were no consequences for their behavior. But me as the victim was the one that was suffering. And I think there's a lot of shame that comes with that. And that's something that I'm still processing and that I haven't quite got over. But I do have a memory. I, like Wendy shared, have also been raped. And I remember being in a restaurant, sitting with a family member who I don't want to say who that family member was, but their thing was always get over it. And I remember sitting there seeing this guy who had perpetrated this thing against me, and I literally started shaking. And the person said to me, "Well, what's wrong?" And I'm like, "That's him." And the response was, "You just need to get over it." And I feel like that was a very consistent response I would always get for the experiences that I had where I was a victim. And so, it is very difficult when there is so much shame to be willing to share and open up, because you feel like you will be blamed always as the victim. So.
Thank you, Dr. Lozapone. My next question is addressed to Dr. Nixon. When one has a broken bone, we let the injury heal with a cast, medicines, and physiotherapy. When one is ill with, say, the flu, we let the illness heal with medicines, fluids, and rest. However, when one suffers from depression, why is there such a stigma attached to it? What are some barriers, including stigma, that you encounter that inhibit people from seeking help? Your thoughts, please, Dr. Nixon.
Thank you. I think the first thing we really have to acknowledge is that the medical model then was supported by the insurance company, has separated out the mind and the body. So as Chris has said, you go because you have a heart problem to your doctor, you go to a cardiologist and are treated. You go because you have a respiratory problem, you go to a doctor that specializes in respiratory diseases. And what we did was we put all of the physical health issues that people could have in one box, but somehow we missed one piece of anatomy called the brain and the nervous system. So the brain and the nervous system was separated from the rest of the body. Therefore, we look at treatment, and insurance companies look at reimbursement as a behavioral health issue. So there was a lack of integration because there was a lack of understanding that the brain and the nervous system are what is being attacked when we have depression or anxiety, or is the part of us that is suffering. And we've decided that because it's the mind and the brain, we should just use our cognitive functions to get over it. And that is a total misnomer, total misnomer. So what needs to happen is we need to see the wholeness of ourselves, the wholeness of our mental health within our full body. And then notice the different parts and honor those parts and begin to have some kind of path of healing that incorporates the fact that it's a physical illness, not just an emotional mental illness. Your nervous system is off. Your chemicals and hormones are off in the brain. You may not be getting enough dopamine or serotonin to fill your brain. So therefore, you may go into depression. And so the stigma is, because we're looking at it just as a mental thing, that the thought is you just pull yourself up by the bootstraps and you'll be okay. And that is a false narrative. And that's what keeps people away from seeking therapy. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Nixon. I'm going back to the speakers now. We will discuss your specific journeys to healing after our dance production in the post-production webinar series. In HERstory, the main character, Her, is portrayed as an ordinary woman who is coached by her family, her dance mates, and therapists to use her passion for Odissi dance to overcome her depression and to launch her on her journey to healing. My question to both Ms. Leggett and Dr. Lozapone are, could you have started your journey to healing without help? Also, since we are in the midst of a pandemic with innumerable challenges, could you please tell our viewers if the COVID-19 disease or the lockdown impacted your depression or your healing in any way? Ms. Leggett, over to you.
No, I wouldn't have been able to. And that's why it's lasted, or I've suffered for so long, is because I couldn't get any help. You know, they thought I was crazy. They kept saying, well, you look good. You know, you're just making all this up. And it wasn't until I was able to receive the TMS, which I didn't get to explain before. They map your brain. They put a big helmet on your head, and it's like a MRI, and it and 9 weeks every day, and it's like electric shock therapy, but the new version. And after 4 months, I slowly was able to start to feel better. No one believed, even then, they didn't believe it was depression. They said it was brain cancer, stomach cancer, allergic reaction to my medication. I still couldn't get people to believe me. And as far as the lockdown, besides the obvious of being afraid I would die, or being isolated because I live alone from my children, my grandchildren, the lockdown actually was a relief for me because I didn't have to pretend anymore that I was okay. I could just be home. I didn't have to act anymore. And if I did say I was depressed, there was like, oh, that's okay. It's COVID. Now you're allowed to be depressed. But I'm actually very anxious of going back out into the world and having to act normal, like there's nothing wrong.
Thank you, Ms. Leggett. Dr. Lozapone, would you like me to repeat the questions? Let me ask you that again.
No, I'm okay. I have them here in front of me. Thank you.
Over to you.
So no, I don't think that anybody can get better without help. That being said, I think there's lots of different types of help that one could get. My experience, this is not a declaration on the field or a whole of individuals. I would look at it just like anything else. You can go to a salon and you can get a great hairstylist, or you can get one that's not so great, right? You can go into a restaurant, you can get a great server or one that's not so great. It just so happens that I had a lot of poor experiences, but I have had a handful of really great experiences. And that has been a godsend for me. When you can find a really great, quality, knowledgeable professional to help you. And the other thing that's been really helpful is having a tremendous support system of people that understand, are non-judgmental, accepting, and willing to understand and hear me and believe me and see me. That has been huge. And that has really been my secret weapon in adulthood. I would say, like Wendy, although for different reasons, this experience with COVID, I'm sure there are people that are on a totally, having a very different experience. Maybe people that haven't experienced depression before might be having a very different experience with COVID, and maybe having depressive feelings for the first time. But I, like Wendy, can tell you that this has actually been a relief for me, because with suffering from anxiety, everything becomes very difficult. Having to think about going into work for a week and the next day, and getting up and dressed and dealing with the traffic and going in and faking and doing something that is very uncomfortable and difficult for me, but you have to present yourself a certain way to the world. And so being able to function in an environment that feels safe for me, where I don't have to, not that I'm not authentic, but where I'm not having to navigate everything that comes with anxiety, and I can just be, has actually allowed me to be in the healthiest state of mind and space that I have been in ever. So insofar as the experience I'm having with COVID, it has been very positive for me to actually be home and not have to go out into the world like I was before.
Thank you. Thank you so much for these frank comments. They are very touching. I would now like to ask Dr. Nixon questions along the same lines. Please briefly touch on the fact that help is now available without specifying what could be tailored to each individual. Also, how has COVID-19 impacted depression in the community? Dr. Nixon, over to you.
Thank you so much. And I just want to go back to what Jabet said. I so totally agree, is that in order to start your healing path with depression or anxiety, you must be witnessed. You must have somebody that sits with you and witnesses and hears your story. And that is so critical to the healing process. Take away medication, take away all these different types of fancy therapeutic methods. What you have to have is somebody that believes you, gets you, listens to you, hears your story, and listens deeply to your story without judgment and without any kind of criticism about your story, or what we call doing a U-turn, turning it back on you, that Wendy has said many times. We call that a U-turn. Oh, it's something about you, but they're really not hearing you. So that's really the first step I want to say. And so far as getting help, there are private practice therapists, there are some good therapeutic centers that are available, and there are community organizations that are slowly getting better, and resources are out there to try to touch into all the different people at all different income levels, as well as equity, inclusion, diversification, that really need different kinds of modalities to get help. So more of that is really coming out. And the stigma of mental health is being written about a lot, but I don't know if you have recently seen that many of the TV commercials now are about people who have experienced depression and anxiety who are coming out to do commercials to benefit mental health awareness. And I think that it is such an important message for our general population to see that the truth is depression hits everybody. Nobody can escape it. Every single demographic in our society will experience some depression. So we do know that. The other thing is there's such great resources on the web now, and that you can see, and shows like what you're doing too with HERstory. There's so many different resources, and one is called psychologytoday.com. Not only do they have a platform of therapists that you can contact, but they have great articles, and they do have an article about how do you know how to choose the right therapist? You know, how do you know it's the right fit? What is a mental health issue? What are the stats on mental health? Am I crazy or is it depression? So these really great articles are there to give you resources so you can help understand yourself and then know where to go. So I want to urge you all to use the platform, good platforms, reputable platforms that can give you solid information. And COVID has only made everything worse. Everything has skyrocketed, depression has skyrocketed, and anxiety has skyrocketed. Thank you.
Dr. Nixon, thank you for your poignant perceptions.
Thank you.
Listening to all of you has made it evident that depression in itself is a huge challenge. On top of it, COVID-19 has impacted it in a rather harsh manner. I realize that we have a lot of picking up to do. This has been a great food for thought session. From this discussion, it is quite evident that experiences are different, manifestations of depression are different, and so the roads to healing must also be different. After all, no two people are the same. However, the patterns are similar. Speakers, you are very courageous presenters to talk so openly about your experiences with depression. This in itself is the first step, as depression is indeed very real and can affect anyone at any time, irrespective of race, gender, age, culture, and ethnicity, as Dr. Nixon pointed out. It needs to be dealt with, and the stigma associated with it needs to be removed. Stigma only delays the recognition of depression and its horrific outcomes. A big healthcare to the healthcare professional who has provided tremendous insight into this darkness called depression. Folks, help is now available. Remedies are many, and the pathways to healing and recovery are plenty. After the production of HERstory, the same panelists will assemble and talk about their varied journeys to healing. However, they warn us that there are no miracles, and it is not an easy process with simple answers. Rome was not built in a day, and so too the mindset takes time. Please be patient with yourselves, is the message I'm getting from our panelists. Being an optimist, I foresee a future filled with stories such as HERstory, where her shows us that pursuing her passion for dance helped her to heal. We now present a sneak preview to our dance production, HERstory.
Nrityalaya, the School of Indian Classical Odissi Dance in Potomac, Maryland, USA, presents HERstory. This multimedia conception will use the storytelling features of Indian classical Odissi dance, appropriate verbal explanations, and audiovisual effects to portray the story of a woman's struggle to overcome and heal her depression by rekindling her passion for dance.
I went through many challenging situations as a child and a teenager, including several rejections. As I grew into adulthood, I struggled with my inner demons.
Snap out of it.
Just deal with it.
I asked, "Show me. How do I do that?" Seeking help made me realize that I could rekindle my passion for dance to heal. Coming soon in fall 2021. HERstory, a dance production that revolves around the story of my life. While dance is my passion, what passions can you pursue to heal?
Viewers, her story will be presented in the fall. Needless to say, we are very excited to have you join us as we explore her journey through depression and her healing process. Thank you for your patience. Thank you, panelists, for an animated discussion in this second episode of the Nrityalia webinar series, Pursuing Passions to Heal, titled Her Story and Our Stories. This much needed discussion has left us with many points to consider and ponder over, as these are indeed important conversations. On this slide, you will find the names and emails of the healthcare professional who participated in our panel today. She would like us to understand that no one is alone, so do not give up, as help is only a click away. Thank you, viewers, for joining us for this very pertinent discussion today.
Viewers, stay tuned for the next episode that will air on YouTube. It will include another diverse panel that will present their stories and different viewpoints. Please help us spread the word. We definitely welcome and encourage participation in our webinars. So if you're interested, please send an email to nrityalia@hotmail.com with your name, telephone number, and email so we can contact you. Please put Nrityalia webinar series in the subject line to alert us to your interest. The credit for the webinar series goes to the Nrityalia webinar team. Please check our website at www.odisseynrityalia.com for updates. See you at the next webinar on August 14th, 2021 at 10:30 a.m. Eastern Time. This is Dr. Chitra Krishnamurthy signing off from the second episode of the pre-HERstory webinar series, Pursuing Passions to Heal,
titled Her Story and Our Stories. Thank you.